Kia ora koto katoa. Welcome to our last session hosted here at ICA-21 Hub, Aotearoa, New Zealand, at the Center for Culture-Centered Approach to Research and Evaluation, CARE, in the School of Communication, Journalism and Marketing at Massey University. We are delighted to share with you a presentation on the culture-centered approach to environmental communication. We have an exciting group of panelists that include Fedra Pezzulo, Catalina Leonis, Jagadish, Thaker, our colleague from here. And I'm really looking forward to engaging with these conversations. So let's watch the presentations and then we will get into the dialogue session after that. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to the International Communication Association's Convention of 2021's panel titled Communicating Environmental Concepts of Culture-Centered Care. I want to thank Catalina Leonis for organizing this session. I'll provide a brief opening remarks, and then each panelist will speak for about 7 minutes. I want to acknowledge that this convention was originally scheduled to meet in a city near where I live now, Denver, Colorado, in the United States, on the unceded lands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute people. Further, I want to acknowledge that land acknowledgements are not enough, as colonization is ongoing. So I hope you will hear how so many, if not all of our speakers at this session are indebted to decolonial and indigenous epistemologies. My name is Fedra Pezzulo. When Mary Oliver circulated her call for this conference, I was thrilled, as I have been invested in thinking about care as a critical ethical commitment of environmental communication. In this presentation, I want to recognize the moment we are in. Then I will provide some background on my own motivations, as well as briefly nodding to a wide range of similar calls globally. Finally, I offer some discussion prompts for our amazing lineup of speakers. It perhaps goes without saying that we're recording for a virtual convention because we're living through multiple acute crises right now. Between the global climate crisis, active state-sanctioned violence against BIPOC communities in the United States, the COVID pandemic globally, and colonial intellectual property assertions over the vaccine's distribution globally, as well as more, there is a lot going on right now. So I want to thank you for showing up. I've shared this slide since last spring, which the Climate Justice Alliance shared with me. We all have good and bad hours and days during this trying time, and that's what it means to be human. I do hope one advantage of this remote format is that more people will be able to hear this presentation when they are able. Yet, I also just want to recognize in a convention about care, how we're all being impacted and not evenly. Having said that, let's now turn to the elephant in the room. Isn't environmental communication motivated by crisis and not care? As context in the inaugural issue of Environmental Communication, a Journal of Nature and Culture, Robert Cox established environmental communication as a crisis discipline. To do this, Cox drew upon the founding for the Society of Conservation Biology, which underscored how ethical norms are a genuine part of conservation biology, as they are in all crisis-oriented disciplines, such as cancer biology. Cox embraces this crisis discipline frame for environmental communication scholars as one dedicated to addressing some of the greatest challenges of our times and to foregrounding the ethical implications of this orientation. In addition to the exigencies presented by cancer and climate change, Cox notes foundational scholarship on wildlife habitat planning, toxic pollution, and sacrifice zones. Overall, his contention about the ethical dimensions of environmental communication is worth quoting at length. Scholars, teachers, and practitioners have a duty to educate, question, critically evaluate, or otherwise speak in appropriate forms when social or symbolic representations of environment, knowledge claims, or other communication practices are constrained or suborned for harmful or unsustainable policies towards human communities and the natural world. Relatedly, we have a responsibility through our work to identify and recommend practices that fulfill the first normative tenet, to enhance the ability of society to respond appropriately to environmental signals relevant to the well-being of both human civilization and natural biological systems. End quote. This normative ethical duty gives value to humans and non-human systems, as well as to labor inside and outside the academy. It gives license to those who want to assert that a contribution of environmental communication scholarship is not solely contributing to existing literature, but also to the wider range of struggles of which our research is a part. Arguably, this norm suggests that not grappling with ecological implications of one's scholarship might be a deterrent for publication. In 2017, as part of the emerging global trend to resist carelessness, I extended this fundamental move to argue that environmental communication should be appreciated as a disciplined form to address both crisis and care. As a care discipline, environmental communication underscores and values research devoted to unearthing human and non-human interconnections, interdependence, biodiversity, and system limits. This means we not only have a duty to prevent harm, but also a duty to honor the people, places, and non-human species with which we share our world. This ethic may be witnessed in scholarship, documentaries, and stage performances that express, for example, a love of place, the cultural centrality of a particular food, the millions who visit national parks annually as tourists with limited vacation time and money, animal studies of interspecies relations, and intergenerational rights policy and international law. By establishing environmental communication as a care discipline, all our scholarship need not attend to crisis to be worthwhile and defensible. There are several phases circulating in environmental discourse today to attempt to capture this sentiment, including the goal of not just surviving, but thriving, and the mission of not just bouncing back from a disaster, but bouncing forward. These discourses aim to foster a world that exceeds reactionary practices and includes hope for generative community building, in which our dreams and ideals may help shape our plans and platforms. Although dialogue that only allows space for happiness and optimism can feel oppressive, as many scholars have written about, the opposite also rings true. Creating spaces that only enable sadness and cynicism can feel oppressive as well. Exigence is a vital motivation for environmental communication scholarship, but other rationales for worthwhile topics of scholarship are important to pursue as well, including those environments and environmental matters that are inspirational, healing, spiritual, and transformative in generative ways. Since then, I've continued to publish on the significance of this move for the ethics of environmental communication. First with Robbie Cox in our textbook to clarify the value of this dialectic between crisis and care. In doing so, we cite a wider range of scholars who have been writing about the importance of care-centered approaches to communication, not the least of which is Mohan Dutta's significant work in health communication, which has inspired work on climate communication and more. Then with Catalina Leonis on the ethics of care and how that matters to our methodologies or the ways we go about our research. Next, in the inaugural issue of the Journal of Environmental Media to underscore creative climate technologies of projection mapping to foster a sense of presence with our interconnectedness and to resist alienation. And more recently, I co-edited a book with Jingfeng Liu on care and green communication in and about China. As the convention theme suggests, it's not just me and my friends that are invested in care. As I write about in my recent cultural studies book review of the London-based Care Collective's manifesto, care is having a moment. If neoliberalism is the zeitgeist of contemporary politics, championing hierarchies of capitalist individualism, hypermasculine competition, xenophobic border policing, white settler colonialism, anti-Black racism, fascist propaganda, petrochemical extractivism, and more, then care is the structure of feeling emergent in resistance. In turn, care has begun inspiring international conference themes, grassroots workshops, mutual aid groups, curriculum, and books. There are, of course, dangers that come with popularity. One of the author's most compelling neologisms is a critique of what they call carewashing, which refers to how corporations, governments, and entrepreneurs appropriate the discourse of care to, quote, capitalize on the very care crisis they have helped to create, end quote. From airline taglines to platform-based markets for everyday care needs like pet care and babysitting, the Care Collective suggests that marketization of care risks preclude the types of systematic changes we need to live our lives more sustainably. With that said, I'm thrilled to be able to hear what the following speakers will say about different genealogies of care and what modalities of care matter most within specific cultural contexts. I ask each to say their names and paper titles before addressing the theme of the session, including questions such as, how does communicating the interconnections of crisis and care shape your critical scholarship, teaching, and public service or advocacy? Following Dutta's work, how does a care-centered approach to communicating care inform your research and related advocacy work? And following the important work of Dionys, Milstein, Castro Sotomayor, and more, what is the role of cultural translation and the importance of place and embodied experiences in constituting different expressions of care? Overall, we hope this session will help provoke further conversation about what it means when we evoke care in the context of environmental communication, and how, when we think through a global set of relations, does the ethic of care translate, create fiction, or regenerate different expressions of terms related in languages beyond English and contexts beyond the global north. Thank you for listening.
I am Jingfang Liu, an associate professor at the School of Journalism at Fudan University in Shanghai. Thank you for this opportunity to include me in such an important panel for us to co-create the much-needed care approach to the study of environmental communication. Over the past several decades, we have seen more advanced environmental science and technologies developed, stricter environmental laws established, continued advocacy efforts. Yet meanwhile, we have also witnessed environmental crisis exceeding the worst predictions of scientists decades ago. So what is missing here? We are missing a key dimension, a fundamental care for nature in our thinking and behaviors. I argue that in order to arouse care, we need to connect with nature on a deeper level. Today, drawing on the social imaginary of modernity, I use two Chinese cases to shed light on how we may cultivate a sense of caring for nature through finding a connection between us and nature through culture. In the framework of social imaginary, modernity is typically characterized by a feeling of disenchantment, in which people experience a loss of wonder and mystery about nature, and a lack of feeling about the death of nature or extinction of species. In modernity, nature is not only disenchanted, but also increasingly externalized from the life of modern people. It becomes an object for human beings to understand through science, transform through technology, and render productive through economic activities. Disenchanted nature is not only stripped of spirit and vitality and no longer wholesome, but may come to an end. The idea of sustainability, however, challenges the paradigm of modernity. The call for sustainability requires a sense of ethical duty, which in turn requires us to be enchanted with an ethically energizing mood. Bennett argues that nature and our modern life can be enchanted again through crossing, the mixing of the previously fixed objects such as birds, opera, nature, and culture into some complex hybrids. He introduced how crossing and enchantment are achieved again through the intricacies and convolutions in nature and culture. Through crossing, a new experience of enchantment can be acquired that drives us to live an ethical, ecological, aware life again. Next, I briefly review two Chinese cases to illustrate how participants used intricate cultural performances, symbols, and rituals to evoke different layers of culture linked with nature. In so doing, they achieved a sense of re-enchantment of nature that ultimately led to the success of their campaign. In March 2011, the Nanjing City municipal government in Jiangsu province in China decided to uproot over 1,000 trees to make room for the new subway line number 3. Many of the trees to be felled are the famous 70-year-old French phoenix trees, or known by locals as Mutung trees. These triggered a campaign to save the Nanjing Mutung trees, made up of both an online campaign and street actions, such as a smile demonstration and tie a green ribbons, in which citizens tied green ribbons around Mutung trees along the major road. The campaign led the government to reconsider the construction plans and invite experts to do a green assessment, and resulted in a compromise plan, relocating 318 trees instead of 1,800 trees, and only one-third of which were Mutung trees. An interesting aspect of the campaign is how participants used rich pictures, stories, and embodied actions to frame the Mutung tree not just as a tree, but a deep cultural symbol of life, whose symbolism cut across several layers: history, religion, home, and identity for the Nanjing people. The Mutung Tree bears a special historical meaning for the locals. For instance, in 1937, Japanese troops occupied Nanjing and committed a hideous massacre. Many lives were lost, yet the Mutung Tree remained as a reminder of the dark days and a silent witness to historical memory. History passed, yet memory remains through key symbols, the Mutung Tree. Mutung trees are also a symbol of home to Nanjing locals. Many citizens grew up having Mutung tree all around. The trees give cooling shade during torrid summer days and offer shelter from storm. Mutung trees exist as living companions and beloved neighbors and provide an important sense of psychological stability. To them, the Mutung tree is a key trigger for their affective sense of attachment to one's hometown. The trees thus function as a physical mediation of people's strong attachment to place and land in the city of Nanjing. Overall, the trees become symbolic resources that evoke a common cultural identity and a strong sense of social responsibility and local commitment to protect the trees. The same indigenous quality is found in another campaign, the Saving the Green Peacock campaign. Green peacock is an endangered species in Southeast Asia and is more endangered than the giant panda, with less than 500 left in China. In March 2017, a controversy over whether the habitat of the endangered green peacock should give way to a hydropower station to be built on the Red River in Yunnan province began. 3 Chinese NGOs initiated a campaign to protect the green peacock. In July 2017, they filed a formal environmental public interest lawsuit against the China hydropower companies. After a long process, the hydropower company finally lost the case in 2020. A major theme emerged from the campaign is how the NGOs frame the green peacock as a cultural symbol, especially in terms of China's traditional culture, to link the public with the actually unfamiliar green peacock to them. Many messages constantly compare green peacock with blue peacock, finding historical and cultural connotations represented by the green peacock. As these examples show, in the traditional Chinese culture and art form, green peacock has been imagined as an honored symbol for auspicious and noble quality since ancient times. By evoking the green peacock as a traditional culture symbol, the campaign connects the public and the endangered peacock on a deeper cultural level, sparks the emotional concern and caring of the participant towards the green peacock. It also helped the volunteer and public co-construct an indigenous collective identity related to both nature and cultural tradition. So, what comes across these two campaigns is actors strategically evoke the trees and the animals as cultural symbols, linking and mixing the realm of nature with culture, transforming nature to a cultural product. Such crossing, once again, enchanted the participant, helped them internalize, energize their social conscience, and develop the moral and ethical sensibility that motivated them to protect the trees and the animal. It's essentially, the loss of Mutung trees, the loss of green peacock and their home to a dam, is not a matter of material loss, but of cultural loss. By recalling the deeper cultural meanings of the Mutung trees and the green peacock, the images of nature and the meanings of culture are mixed into a journey of imagining a new, modern, ecological culture and care.
Buenas and hafade, guahusi tierra napati, sitsu usmasi put fanatan mitsu guinina kashon. I thank you all for being in this virtual space together. My presentation is titled Guaiza and Tsensuli from Archipelagos, Weaving Indigenous Solidarities Against Militarization and the Environment. We'll voyage to a few places, starting in Guahan or Guam at the site of Fua Bay, where our creation story begins. Guahan means we have, or a place that has, because it is abundant. It's also a place of deep history and global complexity, politically designated as an unincorporated territory of the United States. It's actually a core component of US military strategy, wreaking havoc on the entire Mariana Islands archipelago through a massive military buildup, moving thousands of US Marines from Okinawa and spreading them throughout Oceania, including Hawaii and Australia. Current U.S. military occupation in Guahan is roughly 27 to 30% of the island's landmass, and the U.S. Department of Defense has released multiple environmental impact statements for its separate militarization projects throughout the politically divided archipelago. Yet, local community groups such as our Commonwealth 670 have been uniting the islands. Their stories remind us that no island is exempt from the combined effects of U.S. training, testing, and military contamination, because what happens in one spot, or what harms one island, harms the whole archipelago. There is no such thing as sacrificing one island for the sake of the whole, as it shows here on the slide. As I speak, the U.S. military buildup is underway, inflicting systemic and ongoing environmental damage at places like Titian or Litexen, the military's preferred site for its live-fire training range complex. In Guahan, Litexen is an important place because it is known as a place of stirring. It is a sacred and significant cultural site connecting us with the souls of our ancestors, a place of the Chamorro people dating back 3,300 years, and where generations later people continue to go today. Since 2017, Proteji Litexen, or Save Titian, has been bringing together communities in Guahan and Okinawa and elsewhere in solidarity against these destructive military plans for the live fire training range. Yet the Department of Defense is still going forward with their plans. I'm about to show some Google Earth images from March 2021. They show the ongoing and devastating desecration of our ancestors and the land at Litexen, where the firing ranges are being constructed, and the village of ancient village of Magwak, where the Marine base is being constructed. It's roughly 1,200 acres of our homeland, as large as 900 football fields in size, that continue to be destroyed and desecrated without the consent of our community. The forests being cleared are the habitats for endangered or threatened species that are endemic to the archipelago. The training range operation will cause noise pollution, and bullets containing lead, chemicals, and every other heavy metal contaminants can leach into and contaminate the northern aquifer, which is nearby and supplies 80 to 90% of Guahan's fresh drinking water to the island. Fortunately, global intersectional solidarity efforts to continue to build indigenous, feminist, transnational networks to address these cultural, environmental, and social impacts of militarism. Proteji Litexen has sought support from the United Nations. They're also connecting with Code Pink, drawing from different groups across civil society. And Chamorro cultural concepts of guaiza, or love, and tensuli, or reciprocal kindness and care, provide us with other ways of thinking about these efforts. The International Women's Network Against Militarism and community groups such as the Resident Society for a Helipad-Free Takai and One Love Takai all demonstrate how creativity and care help us advocate for peace and genuine security in our respective places and cultures. These groups prioritize indigenous knowledge and practices, collaborate on community education such as these solidarity exchanges in between Okinawa and Guahan, coordinate actions and organize collective projects to address similar issues of military budgets, military violence, health, and environmental impacts caused by war preparations, and problems arising from expansions of military operations and bases. From Okinawa, the Resident Society for a Helipad-Free Takai has been making YouTube videos to educate audiences about the ongoing destruction of the Yanbaru forest, a subtropical forest with indigenous plants and animals that has been nominated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Unfortunately, it's also the site of U.S. Marine Corps Jungle Warfare Training Center and is being destroyed for the construction of the military's helipads for Osprey aircraft. The Resident Society is translating their messages to tell the story of their longstanding peaceful protection of the Yanbaru forest, talking about the militarization that is in progress. And so please really subscribe to their YouTube channel, share their videos to help educate and advocate for an end to military bases, weapons, war, training, and poisoning. Similar to the situation we're seeing with the live fire training range at Litexen in northern Guahan, the situation with the helipad construction in Takai is destroying the environment, putting endemic species, the people, and everything at risk. This militarization is done without the consent of the people. Here we see how Pratahila Texan has been working in solidarity with the people of Okinawa, opposing the military expansion and continued occupation by the US military. Our friends in Sakai are asking for us to continue to spread these messages and to share with each other, to work with each other in 2021. Today, our voyage has demonstrated, of course, that there is a lot of ongoing crises that might signify the success of colonization and militarization. But these places and stories are persistently, creatively, and lovingly sharing the failure of colonization from archipelagos. It is Gwaidza, love, that is the abundance throughout the region, throughout the movements working against the processes and structures of militarization. It is Gwaidza, love, built upon the knowledge that the land is our kin. So the grassroots political organizing and indigenous solidarity reflects our relationships to islands, to archipelagos, to atolls. We treat one another and our environment with love and sensuli, or kindness and care, with generosity, with reverence and compassion. Our journey is connected. Our travels take us to places of joy, of the sacred, but also of places where violence and heartbreak is occurring. Still, these places tell stories of light and love, of resistance, of refusal, and dreams. It's exciting to think outward from this place towards these and other critical conversations with you all, to weave indigenous solidarities against militarization of the environment and more sustainable and just and genuinely secure futures for everyone. Sidzus Massey, thank you.
Saludos, warm greetings, everyone. I'm Catalina Leonis, and I'm very happy to be on this panel. And I wanted to thank Phaedra for her wonderful opening remarks. And I also wanted to thank the other panelists who are joining these conversations about crisis and care and communication. And my talk today will be about Puerto Rico, and I wanted to do a little bit of translating with this opening slide here. So we have the quotation, "Protejamos el ambiente por el bien de nuestra gente." So let's protect the environment for the good of our people. So this is a slogan that is sometimes said in organizing circles. And I will be focusing on Puerto Rico's archipelago, in particular, some areas in the largest island, which I'll talk about shortly. And as an introduction to my remarks, I wanted to offer thinking about emerge and how we emerge with emergency, rather than emerging away from something, because amid colliding crises and on our shared planet that must be cared for, there's no place to really emerge away from in many ways as we consider global climate disruption, as we consider great energy injustices, many other violences that too often are caused by racial capitalism, environmental racism, and much more. So thinking about emerge and emergency and their inescapable entanglements, perhaps. And in addition to the important genealogies of crisis and care that Phaedra outlined in her opening remarks, I'd like to offer some other tensions or dialectics for surviving and living good lives. And so I would also like to offer loss and love, isolation, interconnection, harms and hope, and stagnation and struggle. And you can see that I have different islands depicted here that also are part of an archipelagic formation. I would like to say that Dr. Chiara Naputi's work has been very motivating, very re-energizing, in thinking about my own work as well. And so I want to be sure to acknowledge that, particularly with archipelagic rhetoric and oceanic communication. And I'm most interested in thinking about these dialectics in the context of Puerto Rico. And most of my work occurs in Salinas and Guayama area. And these are heavily Afro-descendant communities, and Salinas and Guayama are both home to the largest island's most polluting power plants. Guayama has the US AES-owned coal plant, which has engaged in numerous illegal acts over the years with dumping coal ash and many other issues. And then Salinas is home to the Aguirre Power Complex, which burns bunker seat fuel oil and toxically assaults the local people who live there with the light, noise, water, air, and other forms of pollution. And In my work, I'm interested in thinking about what are the lived realities of different community members. And one of the ways that I went about trying to understand their experiences was by working with different grassroots groups and other initiatives. So there's the Ida Bajo, the Iniciativa de Eco Desarrollo de Valle de Obos. So that's the eco-development initiative of Obos Bay, which is a beautiful bay that also has these 2 power plants in very close proximity to its waters and its lands. And then Casa Comunitaria de Medios is a community media house that creates many spaces for community members to participate in different educational opportunities to narrate their stories in their own words from their own perspectives. And as I was thinking about how different individuals were expressing their lived experiences, I would sometimes ask the question, what gives you life, or ¿qué te da ánimo? And what I would like to share are a few projects that I think show alternatives to what Eve Tuck would call just a damage-centric narrative, to think about how different collaborators, different people in Puerto Rico who are part of grassroots organizational efforts are working to live good lives. And so in my forthcoming book, which should be out in June of this year, Energy Islands, I talk about different coalitional possibilities. And here's a group, Coqui Solar, that has been working on distributed rooftop solar for years to create opportunities for jobs using a just transition or just transformation framework, so that companies that are already very wealthy, that are also often not based in Puerto Rico, don't continue to just extract money, but how to keep money locally, and how to engage unions, and how to engage local electricians, how to engage local people so that they can be in control of their energy future and their present in Puerto Rico with distributed rooftop solar rather than large solar farms, which often, again, make foreign companies wealthy, often are placed on prime farmland, when instead distributed rooftop solar would allow for empty roofs that are already flat to be utilized very well. And of course, they're also organizing against imported fossil fuels. And as I was working with this group and many others throughout Puerto Rico, the concepts of apoyo mutuo or mutual support and compromiso comunitario or community commitment are key ways of talking about care and enacting it. And so in my book, I'm interested in studying how these different acts of care can take place via e-advocacy. So even if individuals aren't co-present, to draw on Phaedra's work, they still can engage in coalitional work. And I'm especially interested in how this might take shape in the Puerto Rican archipelago and in the US diaspora. And of course, this brought greater urgency and greater meaning during the pandemic because of so much physical distancing. And if you would like to learn more about this book, I do have my website here. And I also have other projects listed on that website, including this bilingual children's book, La Justicia Ambiental es para ti y para mí. And Mabet Colon Perez, who did the cover illustration on the previous slide, also has done the illustrations for this bilingual children's book. I also want to thank Dr. Ilda Llorens at the University of Rhode Island for offering her creative energies to make this book possible, and her son Khalil, who helped us with the narration. So it was a wonderful, life-giving project. This book is being published by Editora Educación Emergente, that's a Puerto Rican press, and we hope that it will be out in summer 2021. It will be available for free download for sharing. So as we think about different collaborations across space and time, hopefully this book can exemplify that. And then one other project that I'll feature that IDEBAJO members have been working on, and I've been a member of this group since 2014, is this El Poder del Pueblo documentary. And so I also created this accompanying website. You can watch the trailer. And what this documentary does is chronicle a lot of the problems and all of the resistive energies that I've been talking about. And I'm hopeful that people will also seek out the other resources that are provided on this website. And I should say that this project is supported by individuals affiliated with La Casa Comunitaria de Medios, which I was talking about previously. So on this website, there are a number of resources. In particular, I want to call attention to the We Want Sun or Queremos Sol energy proposal. It's available in English and Spanish, and it represents the work of many coalitional members across many different grassroots organizations and other groups in Puerto Rico and in the US diaspora who are struggling for distributed rooftop solar and for energy justice and a just transition or just transformation, not only in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of transforming power. So transforming power in all senses of the word, including by holding the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, the local power utility, accountable for its future actions, and whether it is going to continue to be complicit in acts of environmental racism and advancing racial capitalism, or whether it will follow the lead of local visionary individuals and groups who are charting alternative paths. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope we can keep up the conversation about crisis care, isolation and interconnection, harms and hope, stagnation and struggle, and loss and love.
Kero koto. My name is Jagadish Thaker. I'm a senior lecturer at Massey University in New Zealand. I want to thank Catalina for organizing this panel and other members who will be presenting here. I'm going to talk about the culture-centered approach and the work that we did with women farmers in South India. The culture-centered approach refers to the three components of culture, structure, and agency in understanding how people's meanings of health, people's meanings of how they see environmental problems and climate change issues. The central premise of a culture-centered approach is that the material erasure goes hand in hand with communication disenfranchisement. That is, people who are denied access to resources and to decision-making are also denied voice in those policies. My work is particularly focused on women farmers and their adaptation strategies to climate change. What we already know is that for every man who dies in natural disasters, which are increasing in frequency and intensity due to climate change, 4 women die. So there's a disproportionate impact, not just in terms of North and South, but also in terms of gender. There's a lot of research on women's vulnerability to climate change impacts and how they're adopting, but unfortunately, most of that research is framed as either women as a chief victim or a chief caretaker, instead of relying on women's agency in trying to resolve these problems, both locally and internationally. There's also structural determinants of how people adapt to climate change impacts. For example, the role of national agriculture policies, international corporations who work sometimes hand in glove with the national governments in shaping these agriculture policies of access to seeds, to agricultural resources like fertilizers and such. Our work was focused with a 30-year-old women farmers organization located in South India. While they are poor and what we might term as illiterate women because they haven't gone to school, but they are more literate than most of us when it comes to agriculture practices and policies and how to deal with unpredictable rainfall patterns. One of the central things that the DDS has done over the years is seed banks. So instead of borrowing money for agriculture, you can borrow seeds. And once the season is over, you have to give back the number of seeds that you took or the specific kind of seeds that you took. The central learning from this project was that community sovereignty is an important impediment for successful adaptation to climate change impacts. Women farmers told us that having control over what plants, what seeds are getting planted, who has the control over the outputs of those agricultural products, and whether one is able to feed the family or sell the products in the market impacts their ability to adapt to changing weather patterns. This also has to do with the political economy of the village. So one woman farmer told us that earlier, most of the seeds and thereby access to food and nutrition were controlled by upper caste or higher SES groups, and they had to rely on them. Another woman farmer told us that if we grow our own food and eat, we will have better health, it is good for earth, and it is good for animals. So here, care is not just in terms of nutritional and food security for the humans, but how it is also in turn tied to the health of the soil, health of the animals, as well as the health of the environment in their areas. for example, the critical role of birds in spreading seeds across the village is quite important. And this approach aligns well with now popular One Health approach that the World Health Organization and other health experts say. That is how our health is conditioned on the health of the animals and the environment. When we asked them about what kind of adaptation policies they support, the Vermont farmers were very skeptical and said, would we care to listen? Because academics, unfortunately, parachute in a field, collect data, and then vanish without actually helping or contributing to the community. So we, in a sense, we have replaced the resource extraction through data and research extraction in most of our research, unfortunately. So to answer some of the questions, I think listening is a core concept in care, understanding of working with communities. This also involves giving up expertise, which is quite difficult because we are often trained to be experts in our field. Second is to understand our terms and how that different might be from the community terms. For example, about 40% of Indians have never heard or know very little about the terms climate change. But that doesn't mean they haven't experienced some of the impacts of climate change in their everyday lives. And a culture-centered approach research, how does it inform my research and advocacy work? I think I try to pay attention to the culture, the structure that is impeding the expression of agency. I want to end the presentation with a picture where the Associated Press cropped the image of Ugandan climate activist Vanessa Nakate, which it replaced it again, but without an apology. My colleagues at George Mason University recently came with a research paper on Greta Thunberg effect. I wonder if there is a Vanessa Nakate effect as well on increasing climate change awareness. And here is a list of citations for some of the research that we did so far. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Chiara, thank you so much for watching these exciting presentations. You know, what I thought are really vital in the presentations are the rationalities of care that are foregrounded across the presentations, and these rationalities are situated in relationship to a number of dialectics that are foregrounded in the analyses. I also sort of really enjoyed the ways in which the concept of solidarity sort of plays out across these different contexts, particularly in thinking through the relationship between care and solidarity. You know, it was also powerful to note the various interplays of environment and communication with various other aspects of communication, all the way from looking at issues of health and well-being to food and agriculture, to organizing for social change processes, to constructions of discourses and discursive registers. I think, you know, that brings us to a vital point about sort of the state of the discipline as articulated by the sorts of challenges we are faced today. And these challenges, these forms of crises, these forms of large-scale disruptions point to the importance of actually working through care to disrupt the hegemonic depiction of boundaries in terms of how we construct boundaries of communication scholarship, how we construct different disciplinary or subdisciplinary areas of study, different methodologies of study. And you know, one of the key takeaway points for me looking at these presentations is the way in which the challenges of climate change, for instance, encourages us to think about linkages, think about relationships and connections, think through bridges. And a big part of that is the necessity to move beyond the kinds of barriers that we enclose ourselves into as we think in disciplinary terms. I also really enjoyed the diverse cultural contexts and struggles that foreground the notion of culture, that foreground the notion of cultural rationalities, albeit articulated in an anti-capitalist, anti-colonial ethos. And in this sense, a powerful takeaway point is that the process of decolonization is actually a process of anti-colonialism that seeks to disrupt the ways in which capital performs and perpetuates specific extractive logics. So the invitation to care in this panel is also an invitation to dismantling and disrupting the hegemonic logics. I really enjoyed the papers and the presentations in this session, and look forward to engaging further with the authors.